Hey, what's going on? It's Scott. I worked in law enforcement for several years and I came across this question on the internet. What types of stress do police officers deal with? Let me tell you, if you are interested in getting into law enforcement or you're new to the profession, heck, even if you've been on for several years, you need to know about not only the different types of stress, because awareness is good, but you need to know some basics about how we react as humans and then ways to deal with it in a healthy way. And let me tell you, drinking alcohol is not a healthy way of coping with stress. No! But when it comes to the different types of stress police face, the first one that comes to mind is organizational stress. If officers lack leadership at the department they work at, then from the top to the bottom, it's just crap rolls downhill. And there's lack of purpose, there's lack of mission. Officers don't feel supported. In some cases, they feel micromanaged, which can totally eat away at you. Leadership is key, and many police officers need it right now. Not only to effectively help them in their job performance, but what is leadership? It is someone basically mentoring another person at an effective level so that that person they're mentoring in a way and they're leading can do the job better than the person who's leading them. In other words, you want to leave a lasting impression, and any leader wants someone to be better at doing something than what they did. If you have egos in the way, if you have micromanagers in the way, they're just going to keep everybody at bay and nobody's going to work or live to their fullest potential. Who wants that? But also within police departments, you can have such negativity and gossip and straight up toxicity. I'm no saint. When I worked in law enforcement, there was a time I went behind someone's back when I should have just had an upfront conversation with them. There was times I gossiped, but I owned it and I did my best to not be that way again. Some officers, it's like when they walk into roll call, their whole mission for the day is just to figure out what kind of gossip they can get into. That's not good. Organizational stress can have a tremendous impact on an officer's health. But on the flip side of that, when the organization does have lots of leaders, the place is that much better to work for. The next type of stress that comes to mind is critical incident stress. I've heard it said before that an officer that works several years in law enforcement will encounter at least a few hundred critical incidents, whereas the average person in America who doesn't work in law enforcement or first responder work will encounter maybe 3 to 5 within their life. And that even sounds a little bit high. So therefore, when officers encounter violent confrontations, potentially shootings, traffic crashes where people are hurt and or killed, successful suicides, which I can tell you bothered me the most, seeing children as victims of crime, this can be very stressful. And unfortunately, officers tend to just bury it and say, well, another day on the job. Now listen, it doesn't mean an officer is going to be completely traumatized by every single thing. However, there are stress hormones that are fired off on stressful calls or stressful interactions. And if an officer does not actively cope to bring down the effect of repeated release of stress hormones, that's where you get health issues coming into play. Also, let me add, particularly if an officer responds to a critical incident or they see something that bothers them a lot, such as the blood, the guts, or has to make a death notification to a family member about their loved one passing away, however it happened, and that image or that occurrence plays over and over and over again in their mind. If they're thinking about it first person, there's an emotion attached to that thought process, and you re-experience the same negative emotions. And negativity is what our brains are focused more on based on innate wiring of the brain. Why do you think the news covers so many negative things? Because it keeps your attention. Therefore, negative events that law enforcement officers go through can stay more at the front of the mind, and it's harder to think about the good things going on in life or the good things people are doing. More about that in my book, Mental Health Fight of the Heroes in Blue. The next thing is cumulative stress, particularly for officers who are on the job for 5 years or more, wearing that gear, having shift after shift where you are sitting in a car, the ongoing exposure to people when they're at their worst, ongoing exposure to violence, shift work, particularly when you work night shift or rotating shifts. These are all things that over time, this cumulative stress can add up, and it can be damaging to an officer's health if they are not actively coping consistently with their mental, physical, social, and spiritual well-being. Not every officer is going to encounter post-traumatic stress disorder or some mental health condition. I've already said that. However, for any officer who thinks they're not bothered by something, I beg to differ. The next thing is interpersonal stress. And what comes to mind for me is I unfortunately really got so wrapped up in the career that I was physically home on days off, but not mentally home. In other words, I just wasn't present to my wife. And at the time, our first son who was born when I was on the canine unit. I was so wrapped up in the job and thinking about the job, and that's where I got excitement. That's where I felt the calling and the purpose and the passion. And sometimes I would come home after a long day, bothered by the violence or the negativity or the stressful day of having to go to more than one domestic where it was just a ruckus, and it was very frustrating. Whatever the case was, I would go home, and they always say, don't take the job home. I unintentionally would take it home. And there was irritability, there was negative thought patterns, and all these hypervigilance, and all these things really affected my ability to stay connected and focus on the relationship with my wife and our newborn son at the time. But there's also interpersonal stress within the police department itself. You could be working with officers who you do not like. However, we need to stop getting away from the focus of, I don't like that person, to I care about them, and we need to be on a mission, and we need to have each other's back, and we need to work as well as we can together as much as possible. And sometimes that requires some difficult conversations, but you'll be glad you had it in the long run. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience on that. And then there's the legal and administrative stress. Yes, if an officer gets in trouble because they violated policy or committed a crime, yeah, there's obviously that stress. I'm talking about when you're processing a case, particularly say a DWI, and you forget to check a checkbox on an affidavit, and then an attorney brings it up in court that you forgot to check it, even though you completed the sentence beside the checkbox, and the case can get thrown out all because you didn't do a checkbox. It can get frustrating. However, that's one of those things where you just learn from your mistakes. Court, paperwork, departmental policies, and the pressure adhering to so many different rules, especially when facing scrutiny from the public, when you're just a human being and you're expected to act like you're a perfect person, it's really tough. Now, I'm not saying if officers make a mistake and there's consequences, that's wrong. There are going to be consequences, but officers are going to make mistakes. You need to own the mistakes and be someone who can learn from them. But the legal and administrative stress, it's there, particularly whenever we would be involved in a use of force. I remember one incident, we got done trying to arrest a guy who had a warrant for assault on a female, and he just fought and he fought and he fought. Finally, we were able to get him handcuffed, and then we got him into the transport van, and then finally we got him to jail. And then once that process was done, we still had to go back to the police department and complete all the paperwork necessary right after fighting the guy. There was no time to decompress. We had to get the work done. And the problem is you're at the computer and you're trying to fill out block after block after block. All the meanwhile, your mind is still racing to catch up as to what just happened, but yet what you have to do right now, working on the report. It can be stressful. The next thing is societal stress. Obviously, right now in today's day and age, in my opinion, there is not that much public trust in policing. Now, this can range because of the bad bunch that has soured it for the good cops. It can also come from the media focusing on the negative that police officers unfortunately have done and not focusing on the good that police officers have done. But it can also involve the fact that some police officers really lack the training they need to be effective cops and to be good cops. Therefore, it affects the public perception. I was still a police officer in 2020 whenever the incident with George Floyd happened. Needless to say, there was a lot of blanketed statements made across the media. And I remember shortly after the Floyd incident, I responded to a larceny in progress from a sporting goods store along with some other officers. We got the vehicle stopped with the larceny suspect inside. The vehicle description matched and all the suspects matched the description. As we got them out of the car, people started pulling up left and right to film us as if we were going to hurt these individuals, to which I didn't mind all the cameras around us. People have that right, and we weren't doing anything wrong. But it got a little frustrating to a point where they were yelling at the suspects, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And another officer leaned over to me and said, "Nobody cares to hear that they were stealing, and that's why we're out with them." I said, "I know, I get it, but we got to do what we got to do." So we did. Was it demoralizing? No. Was it stressful? Yes, there was a level of stress to it. But as I point out in my book, 101 Useful Tips for Rookie Police Officers, if you know who you are and your mission and it's well intended, the outside noise should not demoralize you and throw you off your base. You are responding to calls when people call 911, and there are so many people that will not sign up to do that, but will be the first to criticize you, sometimes even if you're in the right. The next thing is financial stress. One of the biggest stressors right now due to inflation for many Americans is finances. And I've heard time and time again, if you look into what stresses out married couples, a lot of it can come down to finances. Police are no different, and police don't make a lot of money overall nationally. Now, I think in California, they get paid pretty nice, but we're not getting any richer with inflation going on. And cost of living in certain areas is very high. Therefore, in order to afford living, officers will sign up for off-duty work. But when they're working off duty, yeah, they might be getting paid well, but you can't buy back time missed with your family. And it takes a toll on their health working longer hours in addition to the shift work that is going on. So those are just some of the categorized stressors that police officers can face. Now, let me tell you, on patrol, there's a lot of different stress when it comes to violent people, domestics, death notifications, investigating violent crimes, when children are victims of horrific crimes. There's just so many things police officers can face that are stressful. And I unfortunately said the phrase, "I am fine," one too many times. And I did my best to convince myself. So therefore, if something bothered me, then I didn't really actively cope with it. I just let it play over and over again. I said, it'll go away with time. It didn't. And it led to post-traumatic stress. It led to irritability, negative thought patterns, bitterness. Those are not good. So here's what I recommend. Go ahead and click right here for that video on managing stress. And I look forward to talking to you again in another video. Take care of yourself. Show up for you so that you can show up that much better for the public. It's important. May God bless.